Readings of Almighty God's Words. Exposing Antichrists. Item 9. They do their duty, only to distinguish themselves and feed their own interests and ambitions. They never consider the interests of God's house, and they even sell out those interests, trading them for personal glory. Part 1. Right now, in your minds, which jobs in the church are the most important and involve the expansion of God's management plan?
Spreading the gospel.
Gospel work is a major job. God's work is work as God sees it, but to people, it is their duty. In addition to gospel work, there is also video production work, translation work, hymns, and various text-based work. Nowadays, most people who do their duty full-time are engaged in activities relating to these jobs. Tell me, which of these jobs can be dispensed with? Some people say, music is just a matter of a few notes, which I don't think are important. God's words can still be proclaimed and spread just the same without all those melodies, and can bring people before God just the same. Is it right to say that?
No, it's wrong.
Why is it wrong? Would the various types of video production be any good without music? In addition to being needed for singing hymns within the church, all the films, music videos, choruses, and stage plays, as well as video recitals of God's words and so on, also require music. Although on the face of it, music is indeed just a matter of notes. Once people get to hear this music, it is more effective in proclaiming God's words, and it can play a role in pushing forward the spreading of the gospel, so it is indispensable. Even if you are just casually talking here, and there is background music, the effect will be different, will it not? So this duty is very important. Some people say, is our video production work important then? You tell me, is video production work important?
Yes.
For example, a large portion of the images produced using special effects technology couldn't be substituted with any raw video footage, nor could they be filmed. This is modern art. There are those who say, God's house even talks of modern art. Isn't this a case of keeping pace with the times? How is this keeping pace with the times? This is called taking advantage of Satan to render service. Of course, it is not taking advantage of brothers and sisters to render service. By that I mean, if you can learn some technical and artistic professions and use this professional knowledge in the work of spreading the gospel and proclaiming God's words, then what you have learned is useful. If you can learn it, it is God's grace, and you can then do the related duty, and you will be blessed. Is this not a blessing for you? So what you learn isn't what matters. What matters is whether you use it for your duty. There are others who say, we do text-based work, but no one ever gets to know about us. No one mentions us. And many people don't even get to see us. We've become dispensable. This is not looking at the matter clearly. People can't see you, but God can see you. God is scrutinizing you. God is guiding you. God is blessing you. Why can't you feel it? Does it matter whether or not people see you or mention you? Which truth has not been provided to you? Which sermons and fellowships did you get left out of? In all actuality, the technical content of text-based work is not very high, and the professional aspects don't need to be strengthened that much. However, one thing is indispensable. You must understand the truth. If you do not understand the truth, you will not be able to write anything. You have knowledge of writing. You can standardize language, organize language, and you can set out a structure and ideas in a piece of writing. However, the structure itself is not the article. It needs to be filled with content. What exactly should be written by way of content, and how exactly it should be written to achieve the result of testifying to God? This is what you should enter into. If you only linger on this foundation, that of testifying to God's words and proclaiming this stage of God's work, then your stature will never grow. If, in addition to testifying to God's new work, countering people's notions, and fellowshipping about some truths of visions, you can also fellowship on some truths about life entry, and use some facts, stories, and some quite finely described details to express all of the various states deep in people's hearts, so that people recognize their corruption, and so that they understand what God's requirements are for humankind, and what God's intentions are, and furthermore, recognize the most critical issues: what exactly the truth is, what the path is that people should take, where the error lies in the wrong paths that people are taking now, what kind of people God requires human beings to be, and what the path is that God requires people to take. If you can progress step by step toward this, then the duty you do will be extremely valuable. But this is the hard part. This is the hardest thing. People's entry into life does not happen in the space of 1 or 2 days. Many things take 1 or 2 years from the beginning to when a person has consciousness. It takes 2 to 3 years, or even 3 to 5 years from having a vague consciousness to having a clear consciousness. It takes 2 or 3 years from one's consciousness becoming clear to realizing the nature of this matter, and then it takes another 2 or 3 years to know the seriousness of this problem. People who are numb and have poor caliber can only reach this point. People who are of better caliber and sharp of spirit know to actively seek out what the truth is, which takes another 2 or 3 years. Before they know it, their whole life has gone by. This is how slow life entry is. People's understanding and remembrance of the truth far exceed the speed with which people experience and comprehend the truth. What do I mean by this? I mean that experiencing and comprehending are always slow, because this is life, whereas understanding and remembering only require the mind. People with a good memory, strong understanding ability, some caliber and some educational grounding can achieve these things quickly. But after understanding, does one then have knowledge? No. After understanding, one just stops at knowing what this matter is about and nothing more, but that still won't do when taking action. Why won't it do? Oftentimes, the doctrine you understand cannot be applied or linked to the matters that befall you. As a result, it is only after failing multiple times, suffering quite a few losses, making a fair few detours, and receiving many judgments, chastisements, and prunings that you finally understand the truth and are able to practice and experience God's words in all the various things that befall you. By then, so many years will have flashed by that your face may be covered with wrinkles. Is this not very slow? People's lives progress very slowly because the truth that people understand involves people's nature essence, people's existence, and the things that people live by. And this involves the transformation of one's disposition as well as changes in one's life. How can it be so easy for your life to change into another life? In one respect, it requires God's work, and at the same time, it also needs people to actively cooperate. On top of that, there are the trials of the external environment, as well as your personal pursuit. In addition, you must have sufficient caliber and perceptiveness, and God will then give you additional enlightenment and guidance. What's more, God will mete out some chastisements, judgments, and prunings to you, and your brothers and sisters will criticize you, and still you must pursue upward, so that those things which belong to Satan can be eliminated. Only then can the positive things that belong to the truth enter in little by little. Some people say, when people understand the truth, their lives change. Is it right or wrong to say this?
It's wrong.
How is it wrong? Understanding the truth does not equate to having the truth, and once you understand it, neither is it your life. Once you hear the truth, comprehend it, and understand what you hear, how long can it exist in your heart? It may be that a month later, those words that you thought at the time were most important have completely disappeared, and when you hear them again, you feel as if you have never heard them before. However, if you do possess such a life stature, you don't have to listen to them over and over again. If you don't, you must keep listening. And if you don't listen, then what you understand will gradually dwindle and disappear until you become just like non-believers. Therefore, God's words and the truth must be listened to and read constantly. Reading or listening to them too little will not do. You all have a deep realization of this, right? Sometimes, after not singing hymns or praying to God for 2 or 3 days, you feel empty in your heart and cannot grasp God, so you wonder where to go for a walk to relax. As a result, the more you relax, the more undisciplined you become. And when you go to church to fellowship with your brothers and sisters about the truth, you feel unaccustomed to it. And as soon as church work is mentioned, you feel somewhat awkward. Within the space of 2 or 3 days, you have changed and become like a different person, so that you feel you don't even recognize yourself anymore. How can this be? Don't think that since you have listened to a lot of sermons, the truth has become your life, and you have obtained the truth. You are still far from that. Don't think that just because you have written a testimony article or had that kind of experience, you are already saved. You are not there yet. That is just a small fragment in your long life experience. This fragment may be just a momentary mood, a momentary feeling, a momentary wish or ambition, and nothing more. When one day you are weak and you look back and listen to the testimonies you once gave, the oaths you once made, and the understandings you once came to, they will feel unfamiliar to you, and you will say, "Was that me? Did I have such great stature? How come I don't know? That wasn't me, surely." At this point, you will realize that your life still hasn't changed. What does it indicate if your life hasn't changed? It is that your disposition still hasn't transformed. How will you feel when you discover that, despite having given testimonies and having thought at the time that you were already of great stature, you can still become as negative as you are now? Would you not think that transforming one's disposition is too hard? The truth is not something that can be wrought into people overnight. If people really gain the truth as their life, they will be blessed, and their lives will be different. They will no longer be like they are now, often revealing corrupt dispositions, but will be able to submit absolutely to God and do their duty loyally, and they will be completely transformed. Because humankind is so corrupted, accepting the truth is no easy matter, and because the truth is so precious, it is even less easy for God to work the truth into people. The value and meaning of the truth and all the multifarious aspects of the truth are so valuable and meaningful for humans. But because humans have been corrupted so profoundly by Satan and have so many things belonging to Satan inside them, it is not that easy to work the truth into people so that it becomes their life. Does this mean, then, that the truth cannot be wrought into people? No, it doesn't. It can be wrought into them, but people must have a correct attitude and view, and they must follow the right path. Difficult to do doesn't mean that it can't be done, just like the first two stages of God's work, when God didn't do perfection work, nor did He express these truths or say these words. But some people were perfected, and some came to know God all the same. Looking at it from this fact, it is achievable and not unfeasible for the truth to be wrought into people. It just depends on whether people pursue the truth. So how should one pursue? The simplest way is to read God's words every day, memorize essential words of God, contemplate a passage of God's words every day, and pray, read, and fellowship on those words over and over again. Once you have pray-read these views and sayings, as well as the attitudes toward various people, events, and things, that God's words are meant to teach you, so that you understand them and they have entered your heart, then before you know it, positive thoughts and views and principles of practice will be lived out whenever various matters befall you. You haven't reached this level yet. Did you read what Job did? What was Job doing while his children were making merry? He came before God to pray and offer sacrifices for his children. He never strayed from God. That is to say, steer clear of anything that might cause your heart to stray from God. Don't say anything that might cause your heart to stray from God. Avoid looking at things that might cause you to stray from God or develop notions or doubts about Him. Don't come into contact with people who might make you negative, degenerate, and self-indulgent, or who might make you suspect, defy, or stray from God, but instead give such people a wide berth. Stay close to whomever you can gain edification, help, and provision from, and don't do things that might make you spurn, dislike, or be disgusted by the truth. You must have some idea of these things in your own mind. Don't muddle through life thinking, "I don't care how long I live for, or how my life pans out. I'll leave everything to nature and God's orchestrations." God has arranged environments for you and given you free will to choose. But if you do not cooperate and constantly take it upon yourself to come into contact with those people who are fond of worldly things, and who always indulge in the flesh, and who aren't devoted to their duties, and who are irresponsible, and if you constantly mix with those people, what is the final result and outcome? When those people have nothing to do, they talk about eating, drinking, and having fun, and often tell tales and gossip. If you encounter such temptations and don't stay away from them, and even become obsessed with these things, and deliberately hang out with such people, then you are in danger, for temptation is all around you. When wise people see such temptation, they stay away. They are clear in their hearts. "I don't have that stature. I won't listen, and neither do I want to pay them any attention." These people don't pursue the truth or love the truth. I'll stay away and find a quiet place to read God's words by myself, quiet down my heart, and contemplate for a while, and come before God. All these principles and objectives are: first, do not stray from God's words, and second, do not stray from God in your heart. In this way, you can constantly live before God upon the foundation of understanding what the truth is. In one sense, God will protect you from being plunged into temptation. In another sense, God will treat you extremely graciously, enabling you to understand what you should do to practice the truth, and enabling you to be illuminated and enlightened about all the various truths. When it comes to your duty, God will guide you to try not to make mistakes, to always get things right, and to know the principles. In this way, will you not be protected? Of course, this is not the biggest and ultimate goal. So, what is the ultimate goal? It is that you can learn lessons from various people, events, and things, understand God's intentions, know God's work, and practice according to the principles required by God. In this way, your life and stature can continue to progress instead of stagnating. If you are always busy going about affairs and don't focus on practicing the truth in performing your duties and resolving the difficulties of life entry, then you will not make progress in your life. Life entry is achieved by performing one's duty. If one departs from performing one's duty and departs from God's words, there will be no progress in life. Some people see others idly chatting, and so they get involved and stick their nose in, constantly being a busybody and constantly fond of gossip. God does not like such people. What kind of people does God like? People who can quiet their hearts. Quiet themselves down to do what? To be a puppet that thinks of nothing? No, to pray quietly before God, seek God's intentions, ask God to protect you, and ask God to enlighten you. Also, to seek to be enlightened and illuminated about some aspect of the truth that you don't understand, so as to achieve understanding and clarity on this aspect of the truth, or to seek to resolve whichever aspect of your work is beset by problems and obtain God's guidance. There are so many tasks that need to be undertaken and things that need to be done when one is quiet before God. It is not a case of coming to God to check in whenever you have an idle moment and saying, "God, I'm here. I have you in my heart. Be with me. Don't let me fall into temptation." If you go through the motions like this and are off-handed with God, then you are not a true believer, and God will not bestow the truth upon such people. What must people first possess in order for God to bestow the truth upon them? They must have a heart that hungers and thirsts for righteousness, a sincere heart. What does it represent if your heart is sincere? It represents that you really love the truth. If you are always off-handed with God and are not sincere at all, and always want to make your own decisions on everything, and always want to come before God to check in, say hello, and then call the shots and go do things by yourself, then, although God has commissioned His work to you, you end up having nothing to do with God or the truth. What is this called? This is called resisting God and conducting your own business. Can God enlighten you this way? No. Have you all grasped the way to pursue the truth and understand the truth? You must come before God often, quiet your heart to seek the truth and pray to God, and you must learn to quiet yourself. Quieting yourself does not mean having an empty mind, but having requests, thoughts, and burdens in your heart, coming before God with a sincere and yearning heart, having a yearning for the truth and God's intentions, and bearing a burden for the duty you perform and for the work you do. This is what you should have when you come before God and quiet yourself. I just fellowshipped that all the church's work is directly related to the work of spreading God's kingdom gospel. In particular, the work of spreading the gospel and all jobs that relate to professions have an important and inseparable connection with the work of spreading the gospel. Therefore, whatever involves the work of spreading the gospel involves the interests of God and the interests of God's house. If people can correctly understand the work of spreading the gospel, they should correctly approach the duties they do and the duties done by others. How to approach them correctly? Put in your best effort and do them in accordance with God's requirements. At the very least, don't engage in behaviors and practices that deliberately cause damage or disturbance, and don't intentionally do things that you know to be wrong. If someone insists on doing something, even though they know it disrupts and disturbs the church's work, and no one can dissuade them from it, then they are doing evil, courting death, and showing their true colors as a devil. Hurry and make the brothers and sisters discern them for what they are. Then clear the evil person out of the church. If the evildoer is in a moment of folly and isn't deliberately doing evil, how should such a matter be treated? Should the person be educated and helped? What if they are educated and still don't listen? The brothers and sisters come together to criticize them. What if the person is competent at their job yet doesn't try their best to do it? But for the time being, there's no one to replace them, and everyone still wants the person to do it. Everyone comes together to prune the person and to warn them. God has exalted you and asked you to do this duty. If you don't try your best to do it, and continue to cause a disturbance, and continue to throw in the towel, then you patently have no conscience and are not suitable to do your duty. Is this way good or not? If someone can replace them, then let them go. Would you dare to do that? Most people wouldn't dare. When it comes to defending the church's work, many people daren't stand up and uphold justice. Isn't this a case of not daring to adhere to the truth? Some people bury their heads in the sand and are indifferent when they see the church's work being disrupted or disturbed, as if it has nothing to do with them, and their attitude is to turn a blind eye to it. But if someone criticizes them by saying that they shouldn't be like this, or despises them or looks down on them, they become irritated and think to themselves, "Who do you think you are? Who are you to criticize me? Who are you to look down on me? We must talk this matter through." They take this matter to heart and treat it seriously, and they can't do without saying something and declaring where they stand. They felt nothing when the church's work was obstructed, disturbed, and damaged, but instead turned a blind eye to it. What kind of people are these?
Selfish and despicable people.
Is this just selfishness and despicableness? This problem is so serious that it cannot be summed up in just one sentence. It can only be said that such people have no humanity and are absolutely not good people. In fact, this is what antichrists do, and of course, false leaders are no exception. Antichrists have no idea what the interests of God's house are. When the church's work is being obstructed, they cannot see it. Some people cause a complete mess by disturbing the church's work, but when antichrists see this, they don't take it seriously. They downplay it and limply scold the perpetrator with a few simple remarks, admonishing them briefly and nothing more, without the merest hint of indignation. Do such people have a sense of justice? What kind of people are these? Such people bite the hand that feeds them. They are traitors. They are scum. I just gave a general overview of what people's interests are, what the essence of people's interests is, why people pursue personal interests, what the nature of people's pursuit of personal interests is, and also what the nature of God's interests is, and how they are defined. God's interests are the most just cause, and should be regarded as such. It is absolutely not selfish for God to defend His interests, nor is it only for the sake of defending His dignity and glory. Rather, He wants to defend the progress and results of His work, and defend a just cause. This is a most just and legitimate behavior and course of action, and this is an act of God. Created human beings should not harbor any notions about this act of God, let alone harbor any accusations or judgments. Can we say that God's interests are above all else? Is it selfish to say this? People understand this aspect of the truth, and on this basis, this statement holds water. It is not intentionally biased. It is impartial and legitimate. They never consider the interests of God's house, and they even sell out those interests, trading them for personal glory. This is the essence of Antichrists. Their attitude and approach toward interests are of this nature, and they never consider the interests of God's house. What does never mean? Namely, that they don't think about God's interests at all, nor do they have any such concept. They only consider their own interests. That is what it means. Just how serious is it? Selling out the interests of God's house, trading them for personal glory and personal interests. Their interests are paramount and can replace God's interests. They will fight for their interests, no matter how wicked, illegitimate, or negative these interests are. And in order to seize their interests and fight for them, they would go so far as to sacrifice anyone at any cost. What kind of behavior is this? The behavior of antichrists. This is what Satan does. Satan dominates this human race, dominates a country, dominates a race, and would go so far as to sacrifice any number of lives in exchange for the stability of its dominion. What are its interests? Power and a position of dominance. So, how does it gain a position of dominance, and how does it stabilize this dominance? At all costs. That is, it doesn't care whether its practices and methods appear legitimate or illegitimate to the public, and it uses everything from slaughter and suppression to soft and hard tactics, coercion and inducement, and would go so far as to sacrifice anyone's life or any number of lives in exchange for the stability of its position and the power in its hands. This is the behavior of Satan. Antichrists do things this way too. Do these words in today's fellowship accord with your taste?
I gained a lot after listening today, and in particular, the dissection of knowledge and intellectuals greatly touched me. In the past, I didn't quite agree with the idea that intellectuals lack spiritual understanding. But during this period, through God's dissection of knowledge, I have gradually been able to draw comparisons and see that, on many occasions, I myself cannot comprehend God's words. I don't understand them when I hear them, and when viewing people and events, I look at them and analyze them from an intellectual viewpoint, which leads to a distorted comprehension. This is a lack of spiritual understanding. Now, I can see more clearly the essence of intellectuals.
In talking about intellectuals today, I am absolutely not targeting any one person. But if you can hold yourselves up for comparison against my words, that is a good thing, and there is hope that you can turn things around and enter in. You should pursue diligently, from the point of not understanding or comprehending the truth, to slowly reaching the point where you can understand some simple, stand-alone, less profound truths one after another, so that what you understand is the truth rather than words and doctrines. In this way, little by little, you will have spiritual understanding. If you figure things out by focusing on truth and reality, you will gradually understand the truth. If you constantly analyze things by focusing on doctrine, using logic, and using your mind, then what you understand will be just doctrine or theory, which will never become the truth, and you will never go any further than the foundation of doctrine. Is this not the case? Some people say, "Why can't I understand some of the words of God that I read? How come they aren't that easy for people to understand and accept when measured using grammar and based on essay structure? How do you explain this problem? Can you understand it now? I'll explain it to you. God has been speaking to humans ever since humankind came into existence, and every word and paragraph of what He says is just language, rather than essays. As I speak here today, am I delivering an essay, giving a report, or just conversing? I am chatting with you, telling the truth, and talking about the subjects that you need. I am speaking, not delivering an essay. Therefore, you have to understand what an essay is and what speaking is. There are differences between the two. The several elements that essays require are aspects of knowledge that come from humankind. And God does not need to abide by this knowledge when speaking. He only needs to plainly and clearly speak the truths that He means to speak of. And as long as people can understand the truths they hear, that is enough, and there is no need to even use punctuation marks. Humankind invented punctuation marks and essays, and it also invented grammar and the elements that essays require. These things all fall within the category of knowledge, and God does not need to abide by them. In addition, language comes from God, and this is a positive thing. Therefore, no matter what God says, it is right. There is no need for you to inspect it for grammatical issues, or compare or dissect the grammatical issues. You only need to understand in a given piece, in a given paragraph, and in a given sentence, what God's intention is, what the truth is, what the truth principles are that God requires of people, and what the path of practice is that God tells people, and that is enough. This is reason that created beings, people, should possess. God's words and actions do not need to abide by all these conventions and frameworks formulated by people, and also these regulations and purely intellectual things inherent in knowledge, which do not need to be adhered to. God has said many things, and no matter what He says, it is the truth. The more that people with spiritual understanding and people with experience read God's words, the more they feel that God's words are the truth. What the truth is that these words contain is something that people need to figure out, seek, and experience. God speaks to humankind. Remember, what God does is speak, and speaking is known in slang terms as chit-chat, or talking about stuff. What is the essence contained in what God wants to say here? It is God's intentions, the truth, and God's requirements for people. This is the content. The nature of speaking is to talk plainly and clearly in a chatty way, heart to heart and face to face, sometimes using some colloquial language and dialect, and sometimes using some literary words. To write an essay, you need to have an opening in the first paragraph, develop and expound on the issue in the middle, and then arrive at a climax and an ending. It must be written exactly according to this format in order to be considered an essay, and only once you submit it can the teacher then read through it and grade it as average, good, or excellent. Can you grade God's words in this way? Supposing you said, "This piece is good. It has good grammar. It's spoken in divine language, and it completely conforms to the structure of an essay." That piece is not so good. It's a bit disorganized, and the structure isn't so good. Some of the words aren't that grammatical, and there are even some words that don't seem to be used in the right places. Is it okay to read God's words in this way? It would be distorted to read them in this way, and you will never gain the truth. You must learn to read between the lines of God's words in order to see what God requires of you and what the truth is that these words contain. That's the smart thing to do. You don't even know how to look at these things, and you keep saying all day long, "How come God's words aren't even essays?" God's words should be like speeches, and God should speak with polished language. I don't do that. It would be so tiring, and you would get tired of listening, and the person speaking would get tired too. Think about God speaking in heaven, speaking to Job, speaking to Peter, speaking to Moses and Jonah. Were God's words not simple and clear? You cannot see at all how extraordinary, abstract, or great they are, or how rigorous the wording is. Look at when Satan tempted Job. God said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man, one that fears God and eschews evil? And he is in your hand, but save his life." God's words were both simple and concise, and explained the matter very clearly. This is God's disposition and God's essence. God does not deliberately use mystifying double talk, and His greatness, extraordinariness, honorableness, authority, and power are not faked. Why do I say they are not faked? When He talks to a person, He does not put on a pretense. camouflage himself with a lofty image, or say things that people cannot understand. It is Satan that does that. God does not do that. And since God is saying it, He will make you understand it. If you are a child, He will speak to you in words that children can understand. If you are an elderly person, He will speak to you in the language of elderly people. If you are a man, He will speak to you in language that men are accustomed to using. If you are a corrupt human being, He will speak to you in a way and with a structure to His language that corrupt humans can understand. God speaks in a multitude of ways. Sometimes He makes jokes. Sometimes He makes ironic remarks. Sometimes He is sarcastic. Sometimes He dissects. Sometimes He is sterner. Sometimes He is gentler. Sometimes He makes you feel touched. And sometimes He comforts you after pruning you. All this work that God does and these truths He expresses are not rigid. They are fluid. God is the spring of living water, and the source of truth is God. Whatever God says is okay. There is truth in it, and it doesn't matter in what way He says it. If someone always has notions about God's ways of speaking, the structure of His language, and so on, and constantly scrutinizes and doubts them, and always feels upset about these things and thinks, "The God I believe in doesn't really seem like God. Why is He like that? So I don't want to accept Him. It would be too embarrassing if I accepted Him. I may as well believe so-and-so." What kind of person is this? This is a disbeliever. What kind of people are the majority of disbelievers? People who lack spiritual understanding. When people who lack spiritual understanding read God's words, they scrutinize them intently, with the result that they still cannot completely figure them out. So they wonder, since this is the true way, is it possible to actually gain blessings by believing this way? So many people believe. If I don't believe, won't I go to hell? They even harbor petty schemes. They don't wonder. They say there is truth in God's words, so what is the truth? How come I haven't seen it? I must read and listen. One day they finally understand what they hear and think, what these words reveal is the true situation. It's the truth. But the language is too ordinary and commonplace. It's very run-of-the-mill and might be scorned and discriminated against by the intelligentsia and regarded as the most ordinary talk and even prosaic in the case of some words. And some words which high-level intellectuals in knowledge industries wouldn't condescend to use are actually spoken from the mouth of God. It's so inconceivable, and it shouldn't be like that, surely. What are the consequences of this constant scrutinizing? You will feel that you are better than God, and that God should believe in you and exalt you. Is this not problematic? These are people who lack spiritual understanding. Their attitude toward God is always to stand against God and scrutinize Him. At the same time as scrutinizing God, they are defying Him, and at the same time as defying Him, they are thinking, "It's better that you aren't God, because you are so insignificant. you aren't like God. If you were God, I wouldn't feel at ease. If I despise you and scrutinize you, analyzing you to the point that you are no longer God, and no one believes in you, then I will be happy. And if I look for a great God to believe in, I will feel at peace. Such people are disbelievers. Most disbelievers lack spiritual understanding. They will never understand or obtain the truth from these most ordinary utterances of God. They merely scrutinize them over and over again, not only failing to obtain the truth, but also ruining the important matter of their own salvation, and also revealing themselves and eliminating themselves. Let us end today's fellowship here. Goodbye.